Mr. Irrelevant 2022 with the 262nd pick in the 2022 NFL Draft, the San Francisco 49ers select Brock Purdy, a quarterback from Iowa State.
Today we have a very special guest. Travis May of A to Z Sports is joining us. Travis and I used to work together building the first ever regulated sports stock market. Travis ran our college football department and knows more about college football than pretty much anyone else I've ever met. So we're super, super lucky to have him today. Thanks for coming on, Travis.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always fun to talk some college football. And this time of year, there's lots of overlap with college and NFL draft, all this stuff. It's kind of weird that it's already here, that we're kind of like right in the thick of NFL draft and got all the last second rumors and all the moving, big boards and kind of like ready for it to be done. But also, this is kind of what I've been working towards for like 6 months. So glad to actually kind of sit back and enjoy it.
Nice. I'm sure you have to do mock drafts every 12 hours for the A to Z and for friends and for family. You're obviously a Titans fan. Are you fully on board for the Cam Ward hype train?
Yeah, I think so. Initially, I don't know, really a year ago when I was looking at Cam Ward and there were discussions about him being a decently high NFL draft pick, I was like, I don't know, man. I've seen him kind of make some boneheaded mistakes for a little bit too long, especially in his Wazoo years. But when he actually put it all together this past year and put those traits together with some decent weapons and a scheme that fit him and he could just kind of make it work. He took another step and he looks like the best quarterback in the class from both a film and really peak analytics perspective. Well, with the exception of Jackson Dart, but the scheme there at Ole Miss certainly helps him out.
Do you think he would be a top pick in last year's draft? Because you say he's easily the top quarterback that you see in this year, but it's a far less talented group in my eyes compared to last year when we had Caleb Williams, we had Jaden Daniels, Drake May. Where do you think he would fall if he was in this class?
Yeah, I think anywhere from QB 3 to 5, honestly, from last year. Because when you're talking about a class that had I think it was 75 first rounders in the first
right
10 picks just at quarterback. It was a really stacked class in that group, and even a couple players that weren't consensus first round picks until like the last second, like Penix and Nix, like they were still really good. And so yeah, I think I would probably place him behind that first kind of 3 of Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, and Drake May. But that's not really a slight against him. That's just kind of looking back on how special last year's class was.
Absolutely. I mean, we're taking no slander against my guy, Bo Nix, or Oregon grad. He finished second, obviously, in Rookie of the Year last year, and he was the 5th quarterback taken. So even if he is in that 3 to 4 range, like you mentioned, it seems like there's going to be minimum 3 Pro Bowlers out of that group, which is kind of unheard of. It's kind of like that Dan Marino draft from before my lifetime, but
1984. I was before my lifetime. Yeah,
there we go.
It's been a minute.
Yeah,
but,
right.
It'd be nice even if it's like the 04 draft with Rivers and Manning and Roethlisberger all on that same crew. That would be kind of nice if we had 3 names that just kind of stuck around for 2 decades. The sport kind of needs that right now. I mean, like as much as there are good quarterbacks in the NFL, we need an injection of fresh talent to be the next era's. Well, we might not ever get Tom Brady and Peyton Manning era again, but the Manning, Brady, and Breeze era, like looking back on that, mixed in with the special talents like Rivers and Manning and Roethlisberger, and we may not ever have a golden era like that again, but we certainly need some young players to step up and become those type of pillars of the sport.
Absolutely. I feel like we have right now some of the biggest discrepancy, or like the high end of quarterbacks of your Mahomes, your Herbert, your Burrows, and then the low end of these stopgaps and these guys that are pretty brutal to watch after week 4 or 5 of the NFL season. And you have 3 months left of watching some pretty poor quarterback play. I hope we get some talent both on this quarterback draft and next.
You could have just said Will Levis. That's fine. I wouldn't be
right. Sorry, I didn't mean to put any salt in the wounds around Will. Hey, actually, I remember specifically you were a super anti Will Levis guy.
Oh my gosh, dude!
2 years ago.
Yeah, that was just a joke. And I remember, I still remember I was in a taxi when like the news broke of somebody told Will Levis that he was going to be the first overall pick. And I was in New York on my way to the Mojo office and everyone's freaking out because, Will Levis is going to be the first overall pick. I'm like, guys, no, he's not. And then he fell to the 2nd round and for good reason. So, yeah.
Yeah, just a little more context to Travis's story there. So at Mojo, at our sports stock
Yeah.
market, the former company we worked for, like, prices were moving based on news, based on supply and demand. But where Travis is working in college football and draft status, there's so much up in the air. So a guy, the day of the draft, being told, and obviously it was a false rumor that he's going to go number one in the draft, like that might be 3x his value. So that was
Yeah.
about as stressful as a day as it gets for a college football analyst at a sports stock market company.
Yeah. It's like, we got to make sure our market's in the right spot. So I didn't want to get completely destroyed there.
Right. And then he goes in the second round and
Yeah.
his price gets cut in third. We'll see. We'll see. So another reason I'm glad you came on here is not only because of how knowledgeable of a college football expert you are, but I frankly have just been a little tuned out more than I have in past years, with my Warriors being in the heat of a playoff run, the Giants having a really fun start to the season. So I'm kind of going to rely on you to just hammer out a million questions regarding Niners draft, regarding the draft as a whole. What are the strengths and weaknesses of this draft? And please tell me it's defensive line or offensive line, because the Niners desperately need that.
Yeah, you've got some defensive linemen that could certainly help out. There's a really a handful of top tier defensive tackles, whether it be Mason Graham, who's not going to make it to you guys, sorry, or Walter Nolan, or Derek Harmon, even Kenneth Grant, who was Mason Graham's teammate. There's a list of 4, 5, 6 guys that could all be top 40 picks at just the defensive tackle position, and that's not even looking at the edge rushers. So it's a really strong defensive front class. It's odd though, because there's not many guys that check every single box, that has all the production you want to see, has all the traits you want to see, has just a spotless record, no red flags with off-field stuff. Fortunately, there's a few red flags with a couple of these guys here and there, and so you got to kind of pick your poison, but understand that even with that poison, you might have some pretty cool upside too if it actually pans out. So yeah, definitely tons of edge and defensive line players to help you guys out. But on the offensive side of the ball, in terms of the offensive tackles, some atypical measurements, I guess, with the arm lengths and kind of like the build for a couple of these guys. With Will Campbell out of LSU, even now people are talking about his arm length, but he's still probably going to go to the Patriots. And you got guys like Kelvin Banks out of Texas, and Armand Mimbu of Missouri, and Josh Simmons of Ohio State, and Josh Connerly of your Oregon Ducks. He might sneak into the first round.
Let's go Ducks.
Yeah, there's some decent amount of tackle depth in this class, but not necessarily normal measurables for some of the best ones.
Where do you see the top end talent of the draft falling off the board? Is it top 6 deep? Is it top 15? I've heard a lot of people say that you have 7 blue chip players, and then you could see 25 different guys go between picks 8 through the end of the first round.
That's always interesting, because regardless, there's always going to be 32 first round picks unless somebody breaks a rule. And then there's only 31. But there's going to be 32 first round picks. And so it's weird kind of talking about where the tier break just completely falls off. When I think of like true blue chip players, I think that there's probably only about 10 of those in the class. When I talk to a lot of people around the leagues, whether it's actual scouts or whether it's agents or really plugged in media members besides myself, they go, yeah, typical first round blue blood, almost zero question type of profile. You're only getting about 10 deep in this class. You can squint and say there's probably another 10 that would kind of fit the normal first round mold. But after you get past that mark, the consensus seems to be that like from 20 to 80, there's not a massive gap in terms of drop off. It's a good year to have several picks in that 20 to 80 range to kind of pick your spots and maneuver and get to where you want to be for your guy, or just take a stab at several of them. It's not a knock against players 20 to 80. It's just like there's a lot of the kind of same profile where there's at least one question, whether it's production or the traits or the fit, or is he versatile enough? Is he only in this role? It's not a deep class in terms of like top tier talent. That's the summary.
Man, that felt like a little bit of a tease, saying it's 10 deep and the Niners have the 11th pick in the draft.
But the good news is they can have the best of the rest at that point, so they can take their pick. And so where do you want them to go?
That's a great question.
Like position wise,
I think it has to be the defensive line. I think they need someone to pair alongside Nick Bosa when they're at their best in the late 2020s with an elite defense. Rob Saleh's coming back. He runs a heavy zone, which kind of relies on guys getting to the pass rusher. And last year, Bosa was able to get double teamed a lot. And I really think if they're able to get another edge, whether that's Jalen Walker or I've heard a lot of Shamar Stewart out of Texas A&M. I've seen a lot of the Niner guys I trust in the media connected to him, or even more of a defensive tackle, like you said, a Walter Nolan, someone that's really to get pressure inside, I think is going to be crucial. I mean, obviously it's fun to go offense and to always add another skill player. And we're going to get into this. I saw you had the Niners taking Tyler Warren in your most recent mock. But I do think if we're talking in terms of what this team desperately needs, I think it is defensive line.
Yeah, I think so too. And it was funny. There's 8 of us that kind of do a lot of the NFL draft work at A to Z Sports. And so we were kind of taking turns. And Tyler Warren was still on the board at pick 11. And I was like, well, Kittle's, 33 this year on the back end of his contract. And they could play a whole lot more 12 personnel if they brought him in. Not exactly the chalk because he should be gone by then. But I was like, man, best player available kind of makes sense. But yeah, I think more than likely you're looking at being able to take your pick of a number of defensive tackles in that spot, because the only defensive tackle who should be off the board at that point when the 49ers are picking is probably Mason Graham out of Michigan. So you can take your pick there, whether you like Kenneth Grant or Walter Nolan or Derek Harmon. I mean, it's a little early for all of those, so maybe they try to trade back. But if you're looking at edge, you're probably looking at a Shamar Stewart out of Texas A&M, who's got the traits, but he had almost no sack production when he was at Texas A&M.
Can you explain that a little bit more to me? Like why a guy with these elite physical traits and measured so well at the combine, I think he ran like a 4.59 40, why he has 4.5 sacks in a 3-year career in college?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is sacks are really fluky. I mean, as you know, you'd like to see at least one season where the variance kind of flattens out a little bit and he has some actual sack production. But part of it is a lot of the time because of his strength, because of his wild traits. In many cases, they're having him play contain rather than finish. And so that's a schematic choice. I don't get it. But when I watched him, sometimes I'm like, I want him to go pursue and be the one finishing the play. And that's not always what he's doing. And whether that's by his own design or that what the scheme is asking him to do, it was an odd schematic choice because I would just rather, hey, can you just take out 2 players on the line on every play? And like, I don't need you to contain because you're stronger than the offensive lineman and you can stiff arm him by yourself. That's cool. That looks great. But I'd rather you just create as much havoc as you can. And he wasn't always doing that. I will say his pressure rates actually weren't terrible. Like positionally speaking, edge players average around 10%, 9 or 10%, depending on the year, in terms of like a pass rush pressure rate, about 50% more than tackles. And his pressure rates were above that mark most years and peaking around like 10, 11, 12%. So it's not like he was a really terrible pressure generating talent. He just wasn't in the typical range that you see for first round picks, like in the 18 to 20 range. Guys like James Pierce Jr. out of Tennessee, he had back-to-back years where he was bringing pass rush pressure over 20% of the time, winning his one-on-one over 20% of the time as well, 2 years in a row. And that's not what Shamar Stewart was doing. So it's a little strange. He just needs to add some nuance to his game and not just rely on the strength and the traits to get it done. Because if he just adds a few moves that he can kind of just be his kind of go-to, the one thing that works for him, in tandem with his traits, I think he could take that next step and become an unreal player because he is like, a 99th percentile athlete.
Right. Yeah. The 4.59 40 time, the 40-inch vertical jump. He does seem like a hyper athlete. So if the Niners hoping they're going defensive end, or if they're looking defensive end, I also just like looking at the history of this team under the Shanahan Lynch era with Solomon Thomas, with Nick Bosa, with Javon Kinlaw. They really prioritize the defensive line. And this is probably the worst defensive line they've had in that era. So if both Georgia edges are available, you have Mykel Williams and Jalen Walker, along with who we just talked about, Shamar Stewart and Mike Green out of Marshall. Is there one out of the 4 that you lean?
I would definitely favor Jalen Walker. With him, you're not even really just getting an edge. He's like an edge / off-ball linebacker / depending on the scheme that you're talking about, he's like your like Wolf / Jack. He can be that, hey, I can cover a tight end. I can cover even like the right kind of slot body receiver, but I can also like play downhill in the run game and run fits off the ball. But I can also get off the edge. And he was like the most efficient edge rusher for Georgia this past year, even though that's not really his true natural position. And so you're getting kind of this unicorn type player who can do a lot of things for you rather than just be a super traits heavy, bigger bodied edge that you're getting in Shamar Stewart, or even a less productive pass rusher on his own team in Mykel Williams, who I like Williams, but he's not as twitched up as a Shamar Stewart, and he wasn't crazy productive, and he fought through injury. So it's hard to project what his true ceiling was because he was kind of dinged up in what should have been his most productive year. But I think if I'm going to go get a player that does everything for me, I'm going to go for Jalen Walker if he's still there.
Yeah, it seems like out of the four, he's probably the likeliest to not be available when the Niners pick. I don't know how much you take into account mock drafts, but it seems like everything I've watched is like he's going in between that 7 to 12 range. And Michael Williams, Shamar Stewart, Mike Green, even the defensive tackles we've talked about, Kenneth Grant, Walter Nolan, those guys all seem like they will be available when the Niners pick, or at least the majority of them will be. Is there anything else you could tell me about Walter Nolan? That's another name I continue to see attached to the Niners.
Yeah, he's one that, and I covered Ole Miss as part of what I was doing last year quite a bit. He actually came over from Texas A&M, former 5-star player, really kind of switched up guy for his size. You can use him in a lot of creative ways. He's mainly a B-gap player, but he can line up even wider than that. He can jump really far inside when you need. But he's just a really creative pass rusher is what I would call him. And so he kind of creates some havoc. And even though he might not be the guy finishing the play, he was the reason why Ole Miss had the number one pass rush in all of college football last year. They ranked number one in pressures. They ranked number one in sacks. They ranked number one in a lot of key metrics that I don't think people realize because it's Ole Miss and they don't get the credit that they probably deserve. But that was mainly because of what he was doing on the inside at times to set things up. From the right side B gap, he could launch his body into the center and take out a center and a guard in the same play to set up Suntarine Perkins, who was flying off ball for a sack. Whatever his assignment was, he was going to be aggressive and ferocious and powerful, but also smooth to finish when he was in position to do so. So there's a lot to like with him. I will say there are some in the league, and they've been really weird about getting the details of what the character issues are. But there are character red flags with him. And so if there is a reason why he does fall, it's going to be due to those character red flags. All it takes is one team to kind of take a risk on him. But he's one that if you can get past any kind of character red flags and just take advantage of the talent, I think he's very much so worth a top 15 pick. I just could see him falling lower than that because of what I've heard from around the league.
That's the same things I've heard, and obviously you're a lot more plugged in than I am, but what I read is it's some concerns about his motor. That's the type of character concerns that I sometimes, I don't want to say ignore, but I do think having really good coaching, and also obviously like these guys are making money in NIL, but there has to be a certain level of added motivation when you're not only playing for your contract, but you're playing for your next contract. If he is, like what you say, a top 10, top 15 talent in this draft and fits probably the Niners' biggest need. I mean, they lost pretty much their entire defensive front in free agency. I think that would be a great get for them. Again, it's hard to say when character concerns are a very real thing, and you can say, oh, he's got the talent, but oh, he doesn't actually like playing football. That's a big problem.
I will say it's just funny. Like same concerns have been said about James Pierce Jr. and he's kind of falling into like a fringe first round pick now. And I'm like, guys, if he doesn't love football and is the only pass rusher in this class to post back-to-back 20% plus pass rush pressure seasons, and he's just kind of like, hanging out. Like, imagine if you actually did have some good teammates around him that could help him kind of put it together. The upside is unbelievable. So that kind of character red flags, I don't really get it. And sometimes I think the simpler red flags, they're not like true like character issues, get overweighted.
Right. I mean, I remember 2 years ago when Jalen Carter fell and was all draft long, expected to be the number one overall pick. And granted, his character flaws were a little different. I don't even need to get into it, but with some of the issues down at Georgia and some reckless driving and whatnot. What I'm kind of curious of, and I'm kind of hoping you say the guy with the last name Sanders, but is there anyone you anticipate falling in this draft?
It is funny that Shedeur Sanders for a long time, for whatever reason, was just kind of assumed like he's Deion's kid, therefore he's going to be a top 5 pick. And people kind of overlook the fact that despite being Deion Sanders' kid, he actually has zero elite athletic talent. And that's not like a major knock against him. Like it's just kind of what people are kind of realizing now and just kind of being like, okay, yeah, he doesn't have the best arm in the class. He's not the most mobile. He's not the best at avoiding pressure, even for quarterbacks. It's weird to say that about Deion Sanders' kid, but it's accurate. And so he's not the quarterback 1 in the class. He might not be the quarterback 2 in the class. And those that I talk to around the league, some have Jackson Dart as their quarterback 2 instead of him. And so if he's not even the chalk consensus in the league, QB2, then I think there's a real chance that he falls in this class, because the Titans take Cam Ward, and then the Browns are in such a mess. It doesn't matter if they took a quarterback. They would still be screwed right now because they have to just shed Deshaun Watson's contract in a couple of years. The Giants, they have Russell Wilson, and he's probably the guy, and Jameis Winston, and like they're positioned to at least kind of like band-aid things this year. And so if he's not 2 or 3, then you get into a situation where, well, would the Raiders do it? Well, would the Saints do it? If they don't, then the slide can really start happening all the way down to 21 of the Steelers. And if the Steelers don't, then all bets are off. It's going to be interesting to see where this quarterback class goes, because there's not a true consensus on who the second best option is. So I think there's a really good chance, if we're expecting, if people are still expecting Shedeur to be a top like 5, 6 pick, then he's definitely the best bet to fall down the board versus that position, maybe more so than any other player in the class.
It seemed like earlier in the draft, and this might have all been smoke, but it seemed like there was a lot of connections between Shedeur and the Raiders. Are you hearing that less and less as we get closer to the draft?
Yeah, less and less so for sure. The Raiders and the Seahawks are going to be interesting in this draft because of what they do at quarterback. Because yes, they have new quarterback with Geno Smith and Sam Darnold, but how tied are they to these players long term, really?
Right.
And so I think that's going to be fun to see if one of those teams just goes, you know what, we like our guy, but that we have right now, but we're also going to plan for the future because we're not sure, because we've seen the worst of these guys, and so they might not pan out. What do we do if they don't pan out in this new system with us right now? So I don't think that the Raiders are in position to take a quarterback in round 1. Neither are the Seahawks, but once you get into day 2, both might take a shot, and that's kind of what I'm hearing could be possible, especially with the Seahawks actually, because really Darnold's contract is like it's like a year and a half. Like it's definitely a year, and year 2 would be expensive to shed him if he was a problem, but it's doable. And so they might be in position to take somebody on the second day. But yeah, not seeing Shedeur to the Raiders. And it's funny, the betting markets have been shifting away from Shedeur to the Saints as well, because he's not the fit. And I think Schefter and a couple other people said this too. Those who've been kind of plugged in source-wise kind of already knew this already. The fit for the Saints is actually Jackson Dart.
So I guess Shedeur Sanders' teammate, Travis Hunter, I'm sorry to do this to you. I'm sure you've probably talked and wrote and read and listened about him too much at this point in the draft, but everything I've read and heard is that he is fully anticipating trying to play both ways in the NFL. Do you think that's actually possible?
I think to an extent, and I'm not tired of talking about Travis Hunter and most of these guys, because I covered even college recruiting. I'm covering these guys for like, at this point, like 5 years, because like I've known who they were as recruits for 2 years, even before they got to college. So I'm more than happy to talk about Travis Hunter because he's a generational talent. People get tired of analysts throwing that word around, but he truly is. And if he is able to pull it off to where he's even close to significant part-time playing on the other side of the ball, it's something we haven't seen in a couple of decades, if ever. I would say that he is more ready to hit the ground running as a wide receiver right now. I think the upside might be higher long-term at corner, because the value of a replacement of a really good corner versus a wide receiver, in many cases, unless you're talking like a Justin Jefferson and that level kind of talent, it's harder to find that elite kind of corner. And his instincts mixed with the ball skills that allow him to actually make the play and pull off the interception make him really special, especially if he's on off coverage, just kind of like reading the situation. Maybe he has to learn a few more things in terms of nuances and discipline technique at the next level if we want to nitpick at the corner position. But I would have no problem plugging him in from day one, almost 100% of the snaps at wide receiver. However, the problem with that is at corner, you kind of have to be in the game. You kind of have to understand the tendencies of wide receivers. And so it's kind of a little bit of a catch-22, because if you're going to have him on the defensive side of the ball, it's more difficult to really plug him in there and just be part-time. So I don't know what a team does with him, because I think he deserves a shot at full-time, both sides. But that's a lot at the NFL level. So I think it depends on the team quite a bit. But if it's going to be the Browns, they might as well throw him out there 100 plays a game, because they need help on both sides of the ball.
Right. And it seems like everything I've read, it is pretty much all but a guarantee that it is going to be the Browns at 2. I don't know if you're hearing anything differently. It's interesting that you said that he is, in your eyes, better suited, or at least at this time as a rookie, like ready to hit the ground running as a wide receiver, because throughout the draft process, or even prior at Colorado, at Jackson State, it felt like he was a cornerback primary, and then his receiver skill set was awesome, and he was the best receiver on Colorado, but I always thought of him more as a corner. If I were him, I would try to do both as much as you can. But receivers nowadays, we saw Jamar Chase make $40 million this offseason. The best corners in the league, Derek Stingley, I think might have just got 30. Patrick Surtain's at like 28. So there's a noticeable difference between an upper echelon receiver and an upper echelon corner. And like you said, it's pretty incredible if he's able to even play 35, 40 snaps a game on each side of the ball. That might feel like too much, but it is kind of wild. And I know we kind of live in the Shohei Ohtani world, so maybe it's taken a little bit of the hype around it, but I've never seen a guy, Charles Woodson, I was 1 year old when he was doing what he was doing at Michigan. So it's pretty cool to see Travis Hunter go top 3 in a draft, and teams genuinely seem like they're fully on board with at least trying to have him play both ways.
And I think wide receiver, yes, he could polish his route running up and everything like that, but the way he plays it, he's just a quarterback's friend, and so he can just freestyle a little bit and just kind of force his way open, and I think that's where he kind of adds value immediately. But we'll see, man, because I just want to see him in action at the next level, because he's already proven that he can just be dominant outside of like one game against Stanford 2 years ago when he was actually coming off an injury. So
right,
yeah, he's in a good spot to be really, really special.
I do want to say Ducks were up 35-0 at halftime in his one game in Autzen 2 years ago. I don't think that was much to do with Travis Hunter. I think that was more the Ducks taking advantage of Shiloh Sanders in the secondary. But Is there any conceivable way that either Mason Graham or Armand Membou falls to 11?
Yeah, actually, there's a real case for Membou. He was kind of like a late riser. He wasn't a consensus early first type play, really, until like the combine. There were kind of rumblings about him being a first rounder when I was at the Senior Bowl, and he actually had to miss because of an illness. He had to miss out on all the action, missed like everything. A lot of people were kind of upset because he probably could have dominated and been more of a consensus early first at that point. But once more eyes got on him, and he did really well in the interviews, people were like, okay. And then they look back at his pass block success, and it's just like, yeah, he's probably in that mix. But at the same time, because there's a lack of consensus at the offensive tackle, 1, 2, and 3 spot, whether it's Campbell, Banks, or Membou, if Campbell and Banks happen to go because one team has both of those ahead of him, there's a real shot he's at 11. And our projections at A to Z Sports could see him, even getting into the middle of the first round, actually. Because the truth is, like, we all like to shove these players up and go, oh, that's a top 10 player. That's a top 10. There can only be 10 that go. So I think he's more likely than Mason Graham, because I think it's really chalk that Graham goes to the Jags at this point. But if he falls below that, he's the kind of game-breaking talent that I think teams trade up for him ahead of the 49ers. And so there's more paths I see to Graham being gone for sure.
I asked about those two guys because those are my two favorite draft prospects, at least in terms of their talent and also how I think they would fit in the Niners scheme and what the Niners are most looking for. I agree with you. I think the Niners would have to trade up to get a Mason Graham. It seems like he's pretty much locked at 5 in Jacksonville and could slip to 6 with the Raiders. Out of those 3 offensive linemen that seem like they are kind of, I don't want to say interchangeable, but all pretty much in that same group, seems like Will Campbell's going forward to the Patriots, but out of him, Membou, and Kelvin Banks, who do you like the most?
I think I like Membou over Banks anyway, but I like Will ahead of all of them. I think he's just the number one true left tackle, and he's so sick of the arm length stuff. I don't know if you've seen him in interviews or anything like that. At the combine, he was already like, yeah, I'm done with it. But by the time he got to the pro day for LSU, he was like, guys, like, I don't know what we're doing. So he's a top 5 pick in this draft. But Membou, I think he's a little bit more typical in terms of his fit and his movement. Banks is a high pedigree guy as well. So I think all 3 deserve to be top 20 picks in this draft for sure. But I would just give Membou the edge over Banks.
It's funny you bring up the Will Campbell arm length situation. It's kind of insane to me. Like, all I've heard about him is that he measured at 33 and 5/8, whatever it was, like at the combine, and then magically had another half inch on his wingspan or on his arm length at his pro dates. It's kind of crazy that with all the technology we have around the NFL, it's kind of the same argument of using these older referees to move the sticks. Like, this is a multi-billion-dollar business, and we are still relying on some guy who probably works at LSU measuring his wingspan and be like, actually, he's grown a couple inches in the last month.
Yeah, and the inconsistencies is just kind of weird. And so I think people are just overthinking it. Yes, his arms are probably just under 33 inches, and that's probably fine. It's just, it hasn't been a problem, and it's not a problem with how you play. And that really doesn't show up that often when he's in pass blocking. Not really worried about that at all. So could he eventually move into guard and really succeed at guard as well? Sure. But I'm just going to take the most talented offensive lineman in the class, and I believe that's Will Campbell, even if he does kind of have a funky opening stance.
Totally. So I'm going to let you go in a sec. Last thing, and we briefly touched on it. You had Tyler Warren going 11th overall in your most recent mock draft to the Niners. I would be stoked because of his upper echelon talent, and everyone loves to have another skill player, especially in the first round. I think that's just more of a fun guy to get yourself hyped around before September. Can you tell me a little bit more about the player and the fit? I mean, essentially the Niners would be playing in a lot of 2 tight end sets along with him and Kittle. And I agree with you. I think the Niners are already kind of looking at a succession plan. They haven't given Kittle the extension. He's likely to be holding out of voluntary workouts today. But tell me a little bit more about Tyler Warren.
Yeah, I mean, Tyler Warren, he's older. So you asked the question, well, why didn't he break out earlier? Because you like to see anyone on the receiving side of the ball, whether it's tight ends or wide receivers, break out at an earlier age if you're trying to predict future NFL success. But at his peak, he was absolutely ridiculous. He was the most productive tight end in the nation outside of Harold Fannin Jr. at Bowling Green, who set the record for most receiving yards for a tight end. But Warren last year was somebody who could break away, not with like game-breaking speed, but against the right defender, he could get open vertically. And if he's not open, he's going to stack the defender anyway and out-physical them at the point of catch. And so he's somebody who can work downfield in a number of ways and win in the vertical, but he can also win in the intermediate because he's great at boxing people out in his first step and his first decision. It's just a decisiveness to his route running that kind of separates him enough that gives a window for quarterbacks in that way as a receiving threat. But then he's also somebody that can take a carry out of the backfield. He had like 300-something rushing yards last year. It was just ridiculous for a tight end, just a monster of that size. I don't think he's going to be plugged in that way much at the next level. But it's nice to know that you have somebody like that you can get creative with your goal line packages in a number of ways, and you can rely on him to be that blocker, that receiver, and even a runner at the tight end position. So he's got the physicality to win at the point of attack and blocking, and that really resonates, I'm sure, with 49ers fans who are used to George Kittle just throwing people around on that side of his game too. So he kind of fits, I think, from a cultural standpoint. He's a little crazy like Kittle. Nobody's as crazy as Kittle, but he's a little crazy too. So it allows them to build for the future by drafting somebody like Tyler Warren, but he can be that 1B on offense right away as a receiver, but also not a liability in blocking, maybe a plus side in blocking. So schematically, I think it just makes a lot of sense if he did happen to fall to that point. And even if the 49ers want to trade up for him, that might make sense too. But why they might not is because Colston Loveland might also be available out of Michigan. So there's a clear top 2 in this class. I like both of them quite a bit. Loveland's just a little bit faster, a little shiftier, that more natural receiver, but Warren just does everything well. And that's why people in a class where there's not a lot of players at any position where you're like, oh, they do everything well. But Warren is that kind of talent.
The more you talk about Warren, the more I kind of feel like he is a perfect Niner archetype, at least in the Shanahan offense. Like you said, he can beat corners and beat linemen as a receiver. He can block, but also like his ability to kind of be a gadget and come out of the backfield, get carries, like play almost like that Deebo Samuel role, which they're clearly losing over the offseason, I think would be awesome for them. Kyle Shanahan loves guys who can do more than one or two things. And it seems like Warren's skill set and what he did at Penn State is a guy that would kind of match what the Niners are looking to do on offense, which is really exciting. I still would be surprised if they go offense with all their defensive needs, but
yeah,
if they do go, I would love it to be a skill player. And even offensive line, I know we talked about Kelvin Banks and we talked about Membu. I would love Membu. He seems like he has some incredible traits. But the Niners' offensive line was like middle of the pack last year. And with all the other holes that they have, I just don't see them investing. The only time they've ever invested a first-round pick on an offensive lineman was Mike McGlinchey a couple of years ago. And it seemed like he completely blew them away. And he didn't even, last a second contract with the Niners. And he's doing well in Denver now. But I would kind of be surprised if they went offense. But if they do, Tyler Warren seems like an awesome fit with the Niners.
Yeah, that would be fun. Like I said, he might not make it that far. In fact, both the tight ends might be inside the top 10 picks when it's all said and done. But he's certainly an intriguing talent.
We need Shedeur and we need Jackson Dart to both go in the top 10 so the Niners can have some more of the pick of the litter at 11.
That would certainly shove the talent down. That's always great when you can get an extra quarterback ahead of you and you don't need one.
Right, especially when they don't need one, and it's Shedeur Sanders and Jackson Dart, who, like you said, are quite flawed, and probably in last year's draft would be a lot closer to Bo Nix and Michael Penix than they would be the top half of the class. But this was awesome, Travis. I really appreciate you coming on. I know you're insanely busy 48 hours before the draft and everything that you do around the draft, but you gave me and the rest of the listeners a lot of great insight, not just about the Niners draft, but also about the draft as a whole. Is there anything I can get you to plug for yourself?
Just really check out A2ZSports.com. That's where I've been now for over a year. They've been around since 2016, 2017, and just it really been fun to see that grow. The college side, we really kicked things off nationally in the coverage last year. We have 11 different college football team sites now to check out. So just A2ZSports.com.
A2ZSports.com. You can see Travis. You can see all his awesome coworkers produce some great content. I'm constantly on their site checking out mock drafts, checking out some NFL free agency stuff. And Travis is great. He genuinely knows more about college football than pretty much anyone you will meet in your lifetime. So thanks again, Travis, for coming on. We're definitely going to do this again. Maybe I can squeeze you on for a little season preview come late August or something.
Yeah, man. It sounds good. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Anytime, Travis. Take care. Now, if you made it to the end of the episode, I want to say thank you. If you don't mind subscribing and maybe even dropping a like, you'll become my new best friend. I produce these Bay Area sports podcasts twice a week, and I'm looking to grow my audience as much as I can. You can find the audio version of the podcast on Spotify or Apple Pods at the Bay Area Beat and on YouTube at Bay Area Beat. You can also find short clips on all socials under the same name. Thanks again for listening. Catch you all next week.